morning, church. Can you hear me okay? Was that a yes? You can hear me okay? Yes. No. There's a no. Louder. Okay, I'll talk louder. I see Jim's at work. All right. Okay. I want to start off telling you about my first year I was ordained, like very early in my ministry. First year, I took a continuing ed course in evangelism, and it was offered by an Episcopal seminary out near Pittsburgh, Sewickley, Trinity Episcopal Seminary, which is kind of like an evangelical seminary, which is probably why they had a course on evangelism. And it was just like a 4 or 5 day long thing, which they ran in conjunction with a local church there, and I attended. And it was 4 or 5 days. I don't remember everything we talked about, but I remember they leaned pretty heavy on the two significant questions. You know, are you familiar with the two significant questions? That's fine. You still see this around. It comes out of a program called Evangelism Explosion, and the idea behind it and behind a lot of this course I took was the idea that we'd go out and initiate conversations with people, and we'd work in the two significant questions. And there's sort of variations of the two significant questions, but the first one is something like, if you were to die today, do you think you would go to heaven? And it's just kind of a warm-up question, actually, I think, because the second question is the one that was considered most significant, and it was, if you die and you appear before St. Peter at the pearly gates or whatever, and St. Peter says, why should I let you in? What would you tell him? And kind of the thought with these significant questions, they anticipate that most people would give a kind of works answer. Like most people will say, well, I'm a pretty decent person. I give to charity or whatever, and so I would make the grade, and I'd get to heaven. And again, the idea behind Evangelism Explosion is that you would sort of correct that, I guess, and say, well, it's only on the merits of Jesus Christ. It's only because of Jesus that we deserve mercy and so forth. It's all fine. It's all a fine answer. And so the final exercise for this course was they sent us all out into the streets in groups of 3 with a list of addresses of people who had visited the church, the host church. And the idea was that we'd go out and work the two significant questions. So we went out and nobody was home. At least nobody answered the door, And so we wandered around the streets for a while, and then we ended up in a laundromat. And, people in a laundromat are happy to talk about anything. So we did use the significant question. I can't really remember. There wasn't anything particularly transformative about the conversations, but everybody was polite, and it was an interesting experience. And I don't want to be snarky about it, because I feel a certain snarkiness within myself about it, because I'm not really a two significant questions kind of guy. But it was an interesting experience, and it seemed to me it could be effective. It could be an effective way to start a conversation, and maybe that's all that was intended. They hit it pretty hard, but it might be an effective way to start a conversation about faith in a kind of whimsical way. I thought it would work better if it was sort of whimsical, because it's kind of a cartoon setup, right? There are certain setups, like a desert island with a tree and a person or two people, or two dogs talking about a person, or two cats, or two aliens talking about a person. Or Or, there's lots of heaven setups, right? We grew up, my parents always got the New Yorker, and there'd be two angels in heaven. They'd have wings, robes, they'd be on clouds. And because it was a New Yorker, they'd have like golf clubs or martinis. And so it's a setup like that. But I had this kind of lingering uneasiness with it. And I think it's an unintentional byproduct of the scenario, which it makes it sound like it's a quiz. It makes it seem like faith is a kind of a quiz that we have to pass. And that it makes me think about faith a bit, because what it is, I think that the theology of this significant question is kind of fine. I mean, it seems solid enough that we trust only in Jesus, and this has been, the testimony of the church, and consistent with Scripture, so I'm fine with that, but it's not a quiz. I mean, if this scenario turned out, if you find yourself before St. Peter, you got to bring your whole self. It's not like an answer that you can memorize. It's not going to ask you your theology. You got to bring your whole self. And when I say that, I'm not saying works. I'm not saying, well, you got to earn your way, or you got to do the good deeds or whatever. I'm just saying that faith is not. It's not a verbal affirmation. It's not saying, oh, I believe in this or that. That's not faith, I think. That's not the whole thing, faith. You got to bring yourself. I am depending on the mercy of God, but I don't think that faith is about knowing the right answers. This struck me recently because Karen and I, we went to Italy for a couple weeks, which is like a big deal for us. And as the way we travel, often, we go around looking at old churches. What can I say? And so we were in Padua, and there's this big, massive church, the Basilica of St. Anthony. And there are relics. They have the tongue of St. Anthony there, along with some of his vocal apparatus. That was different for me. And they have his tomb, which is, this big, massive rock thing. And pilgrims were going and just praying on it. They just put a hand on it and pray. But some people were just both hands and the forehead. Some people just glued to it, pouring their heart out, I assume, in Italian. I don't speak Italian. And I looked at it and say, well, that looks like faith. And I might have disagreements with their theology, but I could look at that and say, I see this person having faith, whatever that looks like. So, we have to inwardly digest these things. This is maybe my favorite collect that we started out with this morning, about how we have to read, mark, learn, and inwardly digest. Scripture, I think, is mostly stories about our encounter with God and how we get to know God and meeting God, learning to know God. And we find our stories, I think, somewhere ongoing in this process. Not always that our stories mirror Scripture, but I just think we enter into Scripture and we learn our own story also. But I think it's not the same for everyone, and I think one size does not fit all. We all hope to deepen our faith and deepen our understanding. I think we want to deepen our understanding. But whatever reason you're here for this morning, that's a good reason. Whatever your experience of God is, that's your testimony. doesn't have to be correct. However you're experiencing God in the midst of God's people, that's a testimony. It may just be that you come, you feel a bit of peace here that you don't feel during the week. Maybe you come here and you experience some community at some level. And that speaks to you. That's a testimony. That's a testimony of what you experience. I would admit, I find some of the scriptures pretty hard to digest, especially the end times stuff. There was a lot of end times stuff in the gospel and all through the lessons today. But I recognize in that, I recognize through that there is a belief, a confidence that God will put things right. That's about all I get out of it, I think. Mercy and justice will be reconciled. And we really can't see that or understand how that's going to be. And neither could they. So they described it as best they knew how. And it's colorful. They describe it in a very colorful way, but we don't see how God will act. We have a God who does act. We have a God who acts. Usually in hiddenness. Sometimes in great deeds. Often the corners of our lives. But even the great deeds have a hidden aspect. I think of, Egypt, liberation, or the guidance in the wilderness, the new hope that coming back from the exile, or the new life in Jesus. These are great deeds, but they're remembered and shaped and presented for our digestion. The mighty acts, I think, are types of how God works with us on a human scale to give our lives meaning and purpose and direction. And as the disciples said, the temple is beautiful. This temple is beautiful. But the life of God is in God's people. And we come with our very unique, I think, we come with our unique testimonies. We come with our unique experience to be part of something new, something breaking in, a new creation. And our faith is deeply personal, but it's also somehow shared with this community. Common prayer. I love that. We come together and we say things that we can more or less agree with. We come together and we say things that we can say with a straight face. We come and we find shelves we can arrange our experience on. And there's clearly a process of accommodation, because we don't all have the exact same experience or the exact same understanding. But we bring our whole selves. We bring ourselves. And when we come together, I think the church itself is the great evangelist. It's the testimony of the church that I think is most powerful. The church with all its faults. The church has wounded many. The church has erred. The church has sinned. And yet, God is here. And God is made known here. Sometimes I don't know what to believe. It's constantly changing. I don't know what to believe all the time. But this I believe. This is something I believe. Surely the presence of the Lord is in this place. I can feel God's mighty power and God's grace. I can hear surely the presence of the Lord is in this place. This percussion. But I love that. I love that because I experienced the presence of God in this place. And I love that bit about I see glory on each face. These faces.